we learned about ICC arrest warrants issued for Netanyahu and Gallant, the former defense minister of Israel. How did you find this news, breaking news, and what's the importance of this in your opinion?
It's very important. If you recall, when the South African complaint was sent to the ICJ, there was a huge impact across the world. The West tried to downplay it. I recall when the South Africans were stating their complaint, for example, the BBC, if I'm not mistaken, didn't show it. And then they showed the full rebuttal of the Israeli regime the following day. But anyone who read the indictment would have been shocked. And a lot of people, after reading the indictment, after reading the complaint of the South Africans, they switched their position and they started calling what was happening in Gaza a genocide. So it had a huge global impact. The ICC, I think, in a way, is even more significant because there was a lot of pressure and there were a lot of threats coming from Western governments, and many were skeptical that anything would happen. And ultimately, when Netanyahu and his Minister of Genocide, former Minister of Genocide, were indicted, I think not only was it broadly welcomed, but it was a major condemnation. It was very damning, not just for the Israeli regime, but the entire West, the collective West, I think, was indicted for war crimes. Because all of those governments that were complicit, that have been complicit, that continue to be complicit, Western governments, from New Zealand to Canada, from the United States to Germany, all of them are condemned indirectly. Whether it's the Western media, whether it's Western diplomats, all of them are guilty for being a part of this crime against these crimes against humanity. And it was I think therefore a shock, a surprise to many that the ICC came out with this under that sort of pressure. But I think that the implications for the West will be serious. Nothing will happen to Netanyahu. Nothing will happen to anyone in the Israeli hierarchy. But what does happen is that the regime is further delegitimized in the eyes of the international community, and the West is further humiliated and exposed for being every bit a part of it, just as guilty of the genocide and the Holocaust in Gaza and the genocidal attacks in Lebanon and the murderous airstrikes in Syria and elsewhere. They're just guilty as the Israeli regime.
Here is what Joseph Borrell said, that the EU considers the ICC warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant binding to be implemented. So far, we've learned from Swiss government, from Belgium, and Netherlands, Canada, they were talking about if Netanyahu goes there, they're going to arrest him. But do you think this type of message from ICC to these countries, as you've mentioned, they were part of this campaign against Gazans, they were helping Israel, are they going to change their view, their strategy? Are they going to change their policy? Let's put it that way.
Not for the time being. I mean, Joseph Borrell, I retweeted him, and I said, I don't remember the exact words, but I said, so says the man or the partner in genocide. These are the Canadian government, the Australian government, the New Zealand government, and I'm naming these first rather than the United States and the Germans and the British. All of them are complicit in these crimes. Every single one of them, all of their leaders, all of their diplomats and embassies across the world, all of the legacy media journalists, they're all complicit in these crimes because they gave the regime the weapons, they gave and continue to give the regime the ammunition, and they give aid, financial aid, military aid, and they give political cover. All of these embassies, these foreign ministries, they're a part of this genocide. They are partners in these crimes. And then the media has been spreading disinformation from the beginning. If you recall, and we've gone over this before, but if you recall when the first outrage that shifted public opinion across the globe dramatically in Gaza was when the Israelis bombed the hospital, killing hundreds of people. And since the tide was rapidly turning against the Israeli regime, because remember, the first few weeks, the Western media was using disinformation, lying about beheadings and about rape and all that, which turned out to be false because there's never been any evidence to show that these things happened. But they were using these lies to help the Israelis begin the genocide. So they were all complicit. Then, when the Israelis bombed the hospital and killed hundreds, immediately Western media, along with the Israelis, tried to somehow blame the Palestinians. And a rocket misfired, small rocket killing hundreds of people, something that was impossible. They knew it was a lie. There was no evidence of it. And it was not even possible for a small rocket to do that. But they were lying to help the Israeli regime get away with these crimes. And they've been doing that ever since. And they will continue to do so if they can until the last Palestinian is dead, until the last Lebanese citizen is dead, or the last Syrian is killed. That is how these people think. That is how these people work. It's not just the Israelis. It goes far beyond Israel. However, public opinion across the world has shifted. And public opinion in the United States has shifted. And public opinion across Europe has shifted. These regimes are undermining themselves as the genocide has continued over almost, let's say, 14 months now. As it's continued, the hatred for Zionism has increased, layer after layer of new crimes and new genocidal attacks in Lebanon, in Syria, in Gaza, in the West Bank. We had more killings in the West Bank. We had more killings, bombings in Syria. Today, we had a large number of Lebanese who were slaughtered across the country. And of course, Gaza, we all know. Every day that these happen, the animosity becomes hardened across the world. It increases and it becomes hardened. When something becomes hardened, it's not forgotten after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It is there permanently. So public opinion across the world, they've been hardened against Zionism and against this genocide. And this the ICC indictment and the arrest warrant is not going to change anything on the ground. We're not going to see Netanyahu arrested in Canada. Canada will continue to give whatever it can to help with the genocide, but they'll say Netanyahu can't come here, and he has no plans to go there anyway. But what it does is that it impacts public opinion even further, especially since the ICC and the ICJ, like all international bodies created post-Second World War, they are all under Western influence. None of them are independent bodies. All of them are disproportionately influenced by the West, and especially when the United States threatens people in the ICC or the ICJ with sanctions, that causes fear. But despite the threat of sanctions, despite the threat of punishment, they had to make this indictment. And I think that that says a lot. That shows how bad things are for the United States. That shows how bad things are for Germany. That shows how bad things are for the Israeli regime. So in a sense, I think that this is even bigger than the ICJ. The ICJ, the South African complaint, was very influential, as I said, in changing the views of many people. I recall Professor Mearsheimer, for example, after reading the South African complaint, he said that this is a genocide. So it was very impactful. This, I think, goes far. This has much greater impact than that, because we have an arrest warrant, we have an indictment, but also this has been going on for almost 14 months now.
ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Gallant. Larry, how important is this in your opinion?
I think it's extremely important for international law, especially international criminal law and international justice, and important in one respect I never thought I would be talking about, because the principal, in many ways, architect of that international criminal and justice law is the United States of America. And odd, because we're destroying it. We're utterly destroying it, at least from our perspective. And our perspective is still fairly persuasive and fairly pervasive. So it's an important thing for the court to stand up to us. Very important thing, I think. If we're to have any progress and any solidification of the progress we've had since World War II in particular, then the world has to stand up to this imperial beast and tell it it's wrong.
Yeah. We had reactions from Netanyahu, from the European Union. White House was talking about this. Here is White House talking about it.
Please don't show me, Bibi.
Issuing an arrest warrant against Mr. Netanyahu, the defense minister. You said that you found the process has troubling errors. What errors do you think it has? And second, sorry, you talked about the partners. You want to discuss with partners the next step on the ICC decision. Few of your closest allies, France, Italy, Netherlands, and Canada so far, said they are abiding by the court decision and they can arrest Netanyahu if he steps on their soil. So did they have a different interpretation of international law than you?
So a couple of things. You asked me a couple of things. So the first thing that I will say is that obviously we reject, and we certainly have different opinions on that. And we're going to let other countries speak for themselves. We're speaking for ourselves. And so we're not going to be executing any arrest warrants. That is not something that we're going to do from here. And I do have some examples on when you ask me about the process and why we think it's essentially a flawed process. And so in contrast to how he has treated, this is the prosecutor, how he has treated others, including Nicolas Maduro and his associates. The prosecutor failed to provide Israel with a meaningful opportunity to engage constructively and to properly consider its domestic processes. This calls into question the credibility of the prosecutor's investigation and the decision today. But we've been very clear, not just today, that we do not believe that the ICC has a jurisdiction here. And so over this matter. And so we've been very clear about that. And that stance has not changed.
Yeah. Who has that? ICC doesn't have.
She's lying through her teeth. Now, I don't know if she knows she's lying because she's a spokesperson, and her remarks in the past have shown me that she's not all that, well, let's put it this way. She's shallow-headed. She reads the words that are on the sheet, memorizes phrases, and says them. I'm afraid that characterizes a lot of our spokespersons in the government today. So it's difficult to tell if they really believe what they're saying or if they're just parroting the words that, their bosses have given them. I suspect in her case, that's what she's doing. But in effect, she's lying. They certainly do have jurisdiction. They have jurisdiction in all the countries that have been signatory to the convention. I think it's the Rome Convention, if I remember right, that set this all up. It's been so long ago. And of course, we stayed away from it. And why did we stay away from it? I'll tell you why we stayed away from it. We stayed away from it because we are the imperial giant. And that's what she's really saying. We hold the prerogative. And this is absolutely the case. I was there when the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense stated all this. And they're lawyers shaking their heads. We hold the prerogative to put our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines on any country's soil and kill their people anytime we want to. And they have no right to accuse us of war crimes in the process of our doing that. And that's really what this is all about. It's why we would not sign up to the convention, why we would not come into the court and its jurisdiction. There were other reasons too, but that was the primary one. And it's why my Secretary of State sent John Bolton all around the world. He was the number 3 man at state, the Undersecretary for International Security Affairs and Arms Control. What a contradiction of terms that was for John Bolton. He loathed arms control. We sent him all around the world negotiating bilateral agreements with countries that would, in fact, insure us against the ICC, because they had to agree that if our troops ever operated on their soil, they would in no way, fashion, or form ever prosecute them for whatever they did. And we got a bunch of agreements because we bent arms, we threatened sanctions and everything else. That's how much we hate the international court and its justice system that we helped set up. And now we are repudiating it entirely. That's what she was telling that reporter who asked really good questions. We repudiate the system. She needs to be direct. Don't talk about all these arcane things that have nothing to do with it, like Nicolas Maduro. Oh man, could we go into that and what the United States did there that was illegal under international law? Just tell the truth. We are the hegemon. We are the power. We do whatever we please. That's what she's saying. And oh, by the way, Bibi's our little boy. Bibi's our 51st state. Bibi is our man, so we protect him. Don't tell me about all these other people. Don't tell me about international criminal justice. It's over for us. And as I've said before, we are becoming increasingly the world's pariah in this regard, and they will pay us back. They will pay us back. They outnumber us, and now they outmoney us, $60.2 trillion in the BRICS Plus. That's their combined GDPs. We're going to pay for it, Nima.
This difference between the United States and the European Union when it comes to the Middle East is going to bring some sort of problems for them in terms of the Trump administration being in Washington.
I think so, if they pursue what it looks like from Trump's latest remarks and appointments and such, or prospective appointments. Yes, because he's going to be whole hog for Israel, even more so perhaps than Biden was. If that's the case, then we're going to lose probably eventually. In 6 months, I'll say we'll lose everybody in the world, because people are going to find it increasingly difficult to stay with this genocidal, murderous, barbarian state. They're just going to find it impossible to do so and hold their heads up or look at the mirror when they shave in the morning or when they put on their perfume or their lipstick. It's going to be very difficult to survive the global censure that's just going to grow. It's not going to abate. People aren't going to go home and say, well, okay, I was accusing them of murder this morning, but I think when I have my supper, I'll quit accusing them of murder, when they've murdered another 200 people in the intervening time period. And they're doing it in Lebanon now, too. I mean, they're just dropping bombs on Lebanese villages and towns and cities just to be dropping bombs on them because they're angry that they're losing again. They're losing badly, just like they did in 2006, but written a lot larger across a bigger tapestry. They are losing against Hezbollah. And there's no prospect whatsoever that Netanyahu is going to allow a ceasefire, no matter how many Israelis die, because he knows the moment he begins that path of ceasefire, he's going to jail in his own country.
In southern part of Lebanon, we've learned that Israelis are using their elites, their elite forces in the southern part of Lebanon. Do you think their strategy is changing in the southern part of Lebanon, or they're just pursuing the same kind of strategy and just expecting a new result coming out of this?
First of all, I wouldn't read too much into the 7th Armored Brigade being deployed. Elite, from an Israeli perspective, perhaps. Their moment of glory came during the Yom Kippur War, where they fought valiantly to hold back a Syrian attack. Since then, what have they done? how elite can you be when you're in an armored unit that's used against civilians, that's used against lightly armed infantry? There's nothing elite about the 7th Armored Brigade. It's an armored brigade. They have a certain elan, but they have never fought a meaningful opponent except in 2006 when they fought Hezbollah and lost. And they're going to lose now. The fact they're sending in, when do you send in your elites? At the culminating moment of the battle. I mean, think about it. The Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon, the Republican Guard, the elite bearskin wearing guardsmen of the old guard were held until the end. And then he sent in the old guard to attack Wellington's squares to break the British. But the squares held. The old guard was defeated. They retreated. Has Hezbollah been broken? Every Israeli effort to go into Lebanon has been repulsed by a very strong Hezbollah defense, which has inflicted very heavy losses on the Israelis. Now they've sent in the 7th Armored Brigade. Why? Because the squares broke, Hezbollah's running back in retreat, or it's their last gasp effort. They have no other resources. Now they have to act because they're running out of time. So they're sending in the brigade, and it will suffer the same fate as all the brigades that came before it. Burnt out Merkava tanks, dead Israeli soldiers, the inability to meaningfully penetrate Hezbollah defenses. That's what I believe this is. This is a recognition that the battle has reached its culminating point. Unless Israel does something that changes the outcome, Blucher's Prussians are appearing on the horizon, and they're coming down. And if you don't break Wellington, the combination of Wellington and the Prussians is going to wipe you off the battlefield. That's what Israel is facing right now. They need to break Hezbollah. This is an act of desperation. That's how I interpret this.
In your opinion, the strategy of Donald Trump in Israel would be supporting Netanyahu, or just letting the opposition or those people who are not agreeing on to get into the power, to have the opportunity to be part of the government? Because so far with Netanyahu in power, there is no possibility of any sort of change. We had the war in Gaza. They didn't finish. They couldn't defeat Hezbollah, the Hamas. And right now they're in the southern part of Lebanon. Maybe they're thinking of, when Donald Trump comes to power, they're going to attack Iran. Just being in the southern part of Lebanon and having a new front with Iran. Do you find it that way? Because it seems to me that in the mind of Netanyahu, it can be this strategy.
I think Netanyahu, what you're implying is that he has a 2-month strategy. Netanyahu has a day-by-day strategy of staying in power, living. He's under attack across the board inside Israel. There's a new, Seymour Hersh has published a Substack article, and I encourage everybody to subscribe and read it, that describes the new legal trouble that Benjamin Netanyahu's in. He gave a briefing a couple weeks ago now, where he made the case that the hostages didn't come home because Hamas never planned on releasing the hostages, that he's not to blame, that he wanted this the whole time, but it was Hamas that undermined and released. And to support that, he published an extract of a document that the Israeli Defense Force seized in Gaza early on. This is a strategic document that outlines the strategic vision of Sinwar, what he hoped to accomplish with October 7th, etc., and his strategic vision of the hostages. Early on in this document, which, by the way, is the most sensitive secret document in the Israeli archive, it's so secret that they have a special reading room in the Israeli headquarters of the military intelligence, the Amman, that you have to have permission to go there, which means you have to have a need to know. You're not allowed to take notes. You're not allowed to make copies. You can read the document, and that's it. Netanyahu sent somebody in there and abused his power to gain access to the document, to copy the document, and then to bring that out. And then he used this document to brief the Israeli people. He used a page from it that said that Sinwar was considering going to Egypt with the hostages and then going on to Iran. He said this proves that Hamas never ever intended to do this. I was justified, but that's not the case. The next 2 pages, which Netanyahu, it's a 12-page document. The next 2 pages clearly state that while this was a suggestion to Sinwar rejected this suggestion. And Sinwar said, no, we're staying in Gaza. We'll have the hostages, and we're looking for a deal to turn the hostages into a deal for a ceasefire. The hostages are a tool, part of our strategy. We want a ceasefire. We're willing to negotiate the return of the hostages for this, which proves that it's Netanyahu, not Hamas, that sabotaged the entire hostage debacle. That's this tragedy of these people being held now for over 400 days, I believe it is. It's Benjamin Netanyahu's fault. The judge, he has been charged with 2 crimes. One crime is illegally releasing this information, misuse of classified material, and 2, lying to the Israeli people, deceiving them by using classified information incorrectly. The judge who oversees this had to seal the file because of the political sensitivity. This is explosive stuff. Netanyahu's in a lot of trouble. And so every day is a struggle for survival for him. Every day things continue to happen to chip away at the foundation of his ability to govern. Judges are saying it's time that we bring him up on charges for corruption that he's been charged with. They're now talking about opening up an October 7th investigation that Benjamin Netanyahu will not survive politically. So the notion that the Trump administration is going to somehow ride in and save Benjamin Netanyahu is ignorant as the day is long. Netanyahu's problems come from within Israel, and there's nothing Trump can do to change that, to solve that. Trump wants an end to this conflict. Trump wants this conflict to be over. But Trump can't save Benjamin Netanyahu the same way that Trump can't save Israel. The damage that's been done to Israel is fatal. Their economy is in tatters. They're not going to recover. $67 billion hit last year, over $100 billion hit coming up this year. Nobody's investing, no trades coming in. Thousands have fled their homes. Thousands more will flee their home. Israel can't win this war. And internally, the situation inside Israel politically is chaotic at best. It's not stable. It's unstable. There was talk a little while ago of a military coup against Israel. I will tell you this. If I were the CIA briefing the President of the United States on Iran's future, and I took the Israeli scenario I just painted and replaced everywhere I said Israel, I said Iran. Everywhere I said Netanyahu, I said Khamenei. And I briefed this. Mr. President, in Iran, we have a collapsed economy. $67 billion hit last year, $100 billion hit with no chance of recovery. No investments are going to be made. Political chaos. The Iranians are losing everywhere they're fighting. We go, well, this is the end of Iran. Any rational player, when listening to that, would say, well, Iran is in a state of free fall, collapse. It's over. The regime can't recover. And yet, when we say Israel, everybody ignores it. The world pretends to believe that Israel is stable, that Netanyahu is stable, that the Israeli military is stable. They ignore the fact that they have 12 to 24% desertion rate, that people are committing suicide, that they can't win. There's the morale has collapsed in the units that have to go out and fight over the same terrain that they fought over 3 times previously in Gaza, knowing that they're going to continue to die. The people recognize going into southern Lebanon as a death wish. Every time they engage Hezbollah punches back, inflicts more casualties. They haven't advanced 20 kilometers in. They haven't occupied and controlled a village. They're being slaughtered. This is the reality. Israel is a state in collapse. And it's not Scott Ritter that says this. This is Israeli generals that say this. Israeli politicians, former prime ministers say this. You had an Israeli general go on TV a while back that say that if this doesn't change, he doesn't believe it's going to change, Israel will cease to exist in a year to 5 years. Israel will cease to exist in a year to 5 years. And there's nothing Trump can do to change that. Trump can have all the Zionists in the world around him, and he does. But they can't change this outcome. Just like I could have all the doctors in the world surrounding me, but if I've ingested poison, I'm going to die. They can all wish that I wouldn't die. They can make my death less painful, but I'm going to die. Israel has ingested the poison of its own actions. The world has rejected Israel because of its genocidal behavior. Israel's rejecting itself near civil war conditions. The Israeli president has been warning of a civil war for some time now. Israel can't recover from this. Israel is fatally injured, and there's not a damn thing Donald Trump can do to save Israel. The best he can hope to do is mitigate the damage done by the impending collapse of Israel. And Netanyahu, for Donald Trump, is disposable. And I don't know if Netanyahu will be here when Donald Trump becomes president. We can't get, because everything is moving so fast. In many ways, Donald Trump, I think, would prefer not to have Benjamin Netanyahu, because he knows that Netanyahu he won't negotiate. Trump has complained that there is a solution to be found, but it requires negotiation. And there's one party that refuses to negotiate, and that's Israel. So when you talk about the need for change, the need for bringing it into the conflict, the party that won't go along with that is Israel. And so as much as Donald Trump supports Israel, he understands that Israel's the problem, not the solution. And that while he can surround himself with Zionists who sing praise to greater Israel, Michael Huckabee can pray for the rapture all he wants. At least Stefanik can go into the United Nations and celebrate the Sabbath all she wants in public and promote all this. It's meaningless, because that's just words. You have to fundamentally change Israeli reality. And right now, the Israeli reality is they have consumed a bunch of poison that they themselves made, and they're going to die. And there's nothing Donald Trump can do to save them.
Here is in the Jerusalem Post, they're talking about the southern Lebanon is actually northern Israel. Do you think the mindset of the Netanyahu and his administration is the same? And how is that a viable choice for Israel right now? And how capable are they to achieve that? Because it's dangerous. It's unbelievable the way they're talking about. It's not just about the West Bank, the northern part of Gaza. Right now, they're talking about the southern part of Lebanon. It's unbelievable.
If they're not careful, a headline we might be reading in the near future is that northern Israel is southern Lebanon. That's more likely to happen than Israel defeating Hezbollah and taking over southern Lebanon. Hezbollah is not going to be defeated. But this is the mindset of the pro-Netanyahu people, the pro-Ben Gvir people. I don't know that author. I'd have to Google him up. But I can pretty much tell you that he's not labor. If he's not Likud, then he's part of a far right wing. But Likud, this is the kind of greater Israel policy formulation that Likud has been promoting, that Netanyahu has been promoting. So this isn't written by an academic, I'm guessing, by a rational actor who's looking at it doing sound analysis. This is an activist, a pro-Zionist activist who's pushing for this outcome because he believes in greater Israel. I don't believe this is a guy sitting there going, after careful consideration of all things going on, I believe that the reality is that southern Lebanon is de facto part of northern Israel. I don't know. I could be wrong. Like I said, I don't know who this guy is. I'm just speculating based upon the absurdity of the headline. But the first thing that has to happen is you have to defeat Hezbollah. Good luck, Israel. You haven't done it so far, and I don't think the 7th Armored Brigade is going to succeed either.
Let's assume that Donald Trump goes to a level of helping Israel that they can defeat Hezbollah. Do you think that Iran would stay aside, that doesn't do anything about it, or Iran would get involved in that?
A lot depends on Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump ran on a platform that said he's avoiding war. So I don't think that he's inclined to go to war against Iran. Plus, understand this, the world is different today than it was in the first Trump administration. What has happened since Donald Trump stepped down from office? China has brokered a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. One of the key goals of the Trump administration, one of the underpinning philosophies behind the Abraham Accord, was that Saudi Arabia would normalize relations with Israel and create a Sunni shield against the Shia crescent to hold back the axis of resistance. Well, we just had MBS meet with Russia and commit to the fact that there will be no normalization of relations with Israel until there's a Palestinian state and the capital of the Palestinian state is in Jerusalem. That's a big change from what the position Saudi Arabia had before. And Donald Trump, he can go back to Saudi Arabia and do the dance of swords that he did before and all that nonsense. Isn't going to change Saudi mindset. The Saudis now are working joint military training with Iran. They're having that level of dialogue. It's not moving towards a Saudi-Iranian confrontation, but rather furthering the rapprochement because they both work in the BRICS format, which is a multilateral, consensus-driven, global view. So I don't know what Trump thinks he's going to accomplish. The idea of creating, how do you go to war against Iran if you don't have support amongst your Gulf Arab allies? If Qatar says you can't use Al Udeid Air Base to strike Iran, we won't allow it. If Bahrain says, I'm sorry, you can't use Mubarak is the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet to go after Iran. If everybody says no, how do you do it? And right now, nobody in the Gulf Arab world is looking for a confrontation with Iran because that brings in a confrontation with Russia and China. And Trump's not looking for that kind of confrontation either. So all this notion that Trump's going to come in hard against Iran, I think, is absurd. Trump has alluded to the fact that he would consider lifting sanctions against Iran, that he doesn't view regime change as an essential element of American policy. It always has been. Since the revolution, our goal, the Iranian revolution, the Islamic revolutions, our goal has been to remove the theocracy from power. Trump is saying, no, that's not our goal anymore. So the notion that Trump is going to automatically align with aggressive Israeli policies to attack Iran, I think, isn't reflected by the facts. And again, even though Michael Waltz, I think that's his name, right? Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, even though he has articulated positions that suggest that that's the direction he would like to go, even though little Marco Rubio, as Secretary of State, has articulated this, they don't call the shots. The guy calling the shots is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, remember, is the man who reached out to North Korea for denuclearization, despite the fact that Mike Pompeo, as Secretary of State, and John Bolton, as National Security Advisor, were dead set against it. Despite the fact that Dan Coats, as Director of National Intelligence, was dead set against it. His Secretary of Defense was dead set against it. But he did it anyways because that's what Donald Trump wanted to do. Donald Trump believes that he can negotiate a new relationship with Iran that is mutually beneficial, that moves towards, economic prosperity for all, because that's his vision, global economic prosperity. Can he achieve this? I don't know. Odds are against him. But I do believe that Iran is willing to listen. That's one of the reasons why Iran hasn't attacked Israel. This long-awaited strategic strike hasn't happened because Iran is sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, there's going to be a new sheriff in town on January 20th. We might want to listen to the sheriff before we have the gunfight at the OK Corral. So I think they're going to give Trump a chance to listen, to see what he has to offer, to avoid war. And that's what Trump wants, to avoid war. He doesn't want a war. And so all these people that are thinking that there's going to be this war once Trump comes in, you didn't listen to him when he ran for office. He condemns the Biden administration and past administrations for getting us involved in these endless wars that just kill people. They don't solve anything. He's promoting an end to conflict. And I believe he's sincere. And so let's see what happens. I think Iran is willing to wait and see what happens too.
You said that we all know it's a genocide, but it has some sort of political pressure on the international community. It makes some sort of pressure on them, on each and every country who knows right after this decision coming out of ICC, ICJ, that it's a genocide. How do you find politically this decision? How important is this? Because right now what's going on in Gaza, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And the only thing that we're hoping to have is ICC or ICJ. As we know, the countries are not doing enough for Gazans.
But what does the ICC will never prosecute an Israeli? It won't happen. Sorry to say that. the United States won't let it happen. I mean, the ICC will cease to exist. We passed a law that said that we'll invade the Netherlands and take down the ICC if they ever go after an American. And now we've basically extended American-like protection to Israel. So if you're waiting for the ICC to do something, understand the United States will destroy the ICC before this ever turns into something real. That's the reality. The ICJ is different. It's a court that has a different jurisdiction, one that's linked to the United Nations. But the ICJ's rulings by themselves are meaningless. Meaningless. You think politically that the world's waiting for the ICJ ruling to make a decision to collectively form a military alliance to go in and confront Israel? No, it's not going to happen. The ICJ will issue a ruling. It'll be dismissed by the United States and by Israel. And that's it. That's the end of it, because nobody in the world's willing to do what's necessary to stand up and hold Israel to account, because they're afraid of the United States. As long as the United States provides this unfettered support, unrestrained support for Israel, and the Trump administration will continue to provide this support, and probably even be stronger in their defense of Israel than the Biden administration is. Nothing will happen. The ICJ will come out with a finding, and then that's it. Nobody will take any action on it. The Security Council will not meet and say, because of the ICJ's finding, that we now want to pass a Chapter 7 resolution against Israel, authorizing military force to punish Israel for the crimes of genocide. The United States will veto that resolution. The General Assembly could come together and try to override Security Council in action, as they did during the 1956 Suez Crisis, and the United States will defund the General Assembly. Trust me, Donald Trump would defund the United Nations in a heartbeat and make other nations pay. We still have that power. We still have that level of intimidation, the ability to intimidate. So nothing's going to change. This is why I say, don't wait for the courts. I mean, Turkey now has decided that they're going to cut diplomatic relations with Israel, but they continue to facilitate the transfer of Azeri oil to Israel, keeping a lifeline open. If Turkey was serious, Turkey would not only cut diplomatic relations, but cut all the oil as well, prevent Azerbaijan from giving Israel this lifeline. The world doesn't need to wait for an ICJ finding. They can kick Israel, deny Israel diplomatic recognition, stop doing business with Israel. You want to kill Israel today? The entire world just stop doing trade with Israel. Say, no, we're done. Kick all the Israeli diplomats out, send them home, say, we don't recognize you. Start recognizing Palestinian diplomats to replace them. Occupy the Israeli embassies and give them to the Palestinians and say, this is the true representative of Palestine. That's what needs to happen. Deny Israel weapons, deny Israel food, deny Israel oil, deny Israel gas, deny Israel commerce. And then you really want to watch Israel panic? Say that we won't accept any aircraft coming out of Israel. Any aircraft leaving Israel can't land in Europe. We won't accept ships coming out. We close Israel's borders. Israelis are trapped. You can't leave. We don't recognize you. That's what the world could do. And then Israel is done, finished, dies right now. Right now. You want to cause panic? Tell the Israelis in 2 weeks, no more airplanes will be allowed to leave Israel. Watch how quick millions of Israelis leave Israel. Because they don't believe in it. They don't believe in this. They believe in a myth. And as long as that myth is sustained by the unfettered support of the United States, they can fool themselves into believing that Israel is the land of milk and honey. But when that myth is shattered and the reality hits them square in the face, they're going to run. That's why Israel will die. Israel will die not because the Arab world or the Iranians will defeat Israel on the battlefield. Israel will die because the majority of the Israeli citizens will lose faith in the state of Israel and stop believing that it's worth the sacrifice they're being asked to make to stay in Israel, because things aren't going to get better. They're only going to get worse. And because Zionism is an artificial concept, the people will lose faith in this and they will flee. They will stop believing. Zionism only works as long as the myth of Israel is alive. But when the mythology is shattered, Zionism has nothing to hold on to and it will collapse. And that's how you defeat Israel. So the world needs to stop doing business with Israel. Nations need to stop recognizing Israel. They need to evict Israel from the embassies, withdraw their support, make sure there's no framework for any interaction, diplomatic, economic, or otherwise, and turn these embassies over to the true representatives of the land called Palestine. Make this a de facto reality. Spain should evict Israel, put the Palestinians in. Don't recognize Palestine as, a separate entity. Evict Israel and put the Palestinians in the Israeli embassy. And you start getting nations around the world to do this. Israel ceases to exist because the Israeli population isn't going to hang around. They're not going to sit there and die in Israel. They're going to flee. And that's the end of Israel. When Israel demographically changes, when you have 3 to 4 million people leave Israel, it becomes unsustainable as a Jewish state. And that's why the two-state solution is never going to happen. Because to create a two-state solution, you have to dismantle the West Bank settlements. And as soon as you do that, there's a civil war, and then the faith in Israel collapses, people flee. But we can accelerate this process if the world just rejects Israel and says we don't recognize Israel. Israel no longer exists as far as we're concerned. We're not going to do business with Israel or anybody who calls themselves Israeli. And when you do that, Israel dies. People flee. Now the only solution is a single state solution. And here's the beauty of a single state solution, the way I articulated. Because Israel collapses on its own volition, the Israeli government will have no choice but to give up its nuclear weapons program, because they sure as hell aren't going to give the Palestinians nuclear weapons. And they will do what I call the South African solution. They will call the International Atomic Energy Agency. They will sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then they will turn over their nuclear weapons program to be dismantled and destroyed by international inspectors, so that when it becomes the state of Palestine, Israel is Palestine will be a non-nuclear state, fully in compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is another benefit of seeking the collapse of Israel, the indirect route. Don't talk about an existential fight with Iran and all that. That could lead to the Samson option. That could lead to Israel saying, fire our nukes, kill everybody. We don't want the Samson option. Kill Israel this way. Just cut it off, cease to recognize it, and watch Israel collapse from within.